All right. Welcome back, everybody, to your podcast where every car tells a story. We are To All the Cars I've Loved Before, or as I like to call it, Cars Love Nation. I'm Christian. He is Doug. Get a hold of me, Christian at carslove.com. He is Doug at carslove.com. And this is a special Blue Angels weekend, and where I sit in my air-conditioned bunker. The Blue Angels, this is their air show they do every July. They were streaking over my house, and we had to wait until all the roar of freedom, as they say, died down, so it wouldn't drown me out as I was speaking. So they have a practice show today, another practice show tomorrow. The real deal is Saturday. And, hey, you know, I am in the mood. It gets the blood pumping, which is good because we have a great guest today who is, well, we'll get into this in a minute. Doug, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Great to be back here with you. That's my tagline.
All right. Sounds good. And I've been having some internet problems. This is what happens when you get your internet from Dollar Tree. It's a little spotty. It's a little iffy. But you know what? Hey, you know, I got it back there where you can get the discount orange juice. But we'll try it again.
I didn't know dial-up was still a thing, but you proved me wrong.
Yeah, well, this is a spin. This is dial-up with a rotary phone. So it's actually very curious the way it goes. But a little bit of housekeeping as we normally do. We see the stats go up. Want to thank everybody. The audience is growing. Again, all around the world, we can see the downloads, especially in Europe. I don't know if it was my recent trip to Ireland, but very excited to have you aboard. If you would like to be on the show, if you are a car nut or just fascinated with we get this a lot where people say, hey, I like the spirit of the show. I'm not a huge car person, but you know what? Invariably, those people have some of the most interesting stories to tell. Okay.
Or they may have a car nut friend. Sorry for the interruption. They may have a car nut friend. Refer us to your car nut friends.
Love it.
Too.
Yeah, one of our earlier tandem guests in season 1 was husband and wife team, Adam, who we love, who goes way back with Doug. But, you know, his wife, Melissa, was an even better guest. I mean, she is way up there in the pantheon of guests here. So, yeah, very, very good point. So every car tells a story. Feel free to reach out to us. And, get involved. Email us, okay? You also check out carslove.com. More and more we're seeing in the analytics that more and more people are actually listening to the show from the site itself, carslove.com. So you can listen to the episodes there, as well as Doug has us propagated all over the internet. I think we're on, what are we on? Spotify. We're on, of course,
Spotify,
Apple Podcasts,
Apple,
wherever.
Castro, you name it, we're on it.
Yeah, FidelCastro.com. Who would have known that he would have started an ISP? But yeah, we're huge in Cuba. What can you say? So listen to the episodes. Follow the show. Download the episodes. Follow the show. We track all that. And we love to get all the feedback from listeners too. So do please feel free. Do we have anything, Doug, to share with listenership? It's been a week or two since we've recorded, so we're jumping back in with both feet. Anything new about the show? Any guests we want to tease? Shows upcoming? Anything you want to share before we introduce this week's guest?
Yeah. Well, besides this week's guest, who I went to high school with, and we had another mutual friend that we went to high school with who was also a guest, Joe. We just interviewed a very famous former rock crawler turned professional monster truck driver turned YouTube star, and can't wait to get that episode out. We're just going to keep dropping little tidbits, but what a great lady, and gosh, so much to say.
Nicole Johnson. Yep.
Named Nicole Johnson, and Nicole Johnson's Detour, former driver of the Scooby-Doo monster truck.
Yeah. So check her out at Nicole Johnson's Detour.com. And that'll get you to the show on YouTube. It's just blowing up. It's so much fun. And but not to bury the lead here. Let's let's bring in today's guest. And by way of prologue here, Doug, when I say barn find, what do you think? What's a barn find to you?
So, barn find, and there's a great show on YouTube, by the way, called Barn Find Hunter that I like.
Yeah, but
barn find is just a car that got left behind. Maybe it broke down.
That's right.
Maybe somebody passed away. Maybe somebody had a car buying habit and not their repair budget in mind, and they just got forgotten. And
perfect.
So there you have it.
And
that's what I call a car.
That's perfect. That's perfect. And
you're welcome.
And the setup is that you find these cars in a barn, which is the perfect prologue to today's guest, because as we're talking to him, guess where we found him? In a barn. Today's guest is a little bit of a barn find. His name is James. I just met him. Delightful gentleman. But he is joining this podcast we're recording. He is in his barn, surrounded by a bunch of cars, some simply skeletons, some chassis, some in different states of repair, restoration. This one needs a paint job. This one's on a lift. That one doesn't have the body. He's got a 31 Packard frame that he just got a 41 Packard motor for. He's going to tell you all about it. But since he and Doug go way back, I am going to gently hand the introduction baton to Doug so that he can tell you a little bit more about James.
Yeah, well, James and I go back to probably middle school and certainly through high school. Haven't talked in about 30 years, but recognized his voice on the phone like yesterday. Joked around.
I didn't realize
about
that. You guys just
we reconnected through Joe.
You knew him then, but you did. Yeah. You have not heard this guy's voice in 30 years.
Correct.
It's been a long time.
I love that. Didn't realize that. Love that. Sorry, didn't mean to break in. That's fantastic. No. Please continue.
And it's so I had heard from Joe, our former guest, that James does auto restoration on the Eastern Shore. Like, that is his job. Classic auto restoration.
Perfect guest. Perfect guest.
Perfect guest. He has lots of stories, not only of his own cars, but of these cars that they're hobbyist cars, right? So he's restoring them, and somebody who's holding on to an old car, right? They've got some stories behind it, right? Whether it was the grandmother's car, right? What grandfather's car, whether it was the neighbor's car, whether the wife had one just like it, but had to get rid of it 40 years ago, and she's been dying to have it back or something close to it ever since. So kind of with that, and it's funny, James and I were talking, and he filled out our online form about his first car, which was I will leave it to him, but I remember that car in high school, and I remember that car doubling as a police lookalike vehicle.
Oh boy!
But let's let James. James, feel free to introduce yourself. Tell us about where you live, what you do, and we can talk about your first car, which is definitely a family affair.
Well, thank you both, Doug and Christian, for having me on the podcast. I'm honored to be on here, and this is a lot of fun. And listening to some of your other podcast people talking about their cars, it's been really enjoyable. So,
thank you.
Going back to my first car, so it's a bit embarrassing now. It was a 77 Caprice Classic. It came from one of my grandparents, and I think it was, maybe, if my memory serves, it was a couple $100 or something, or it may be worked off the payment or something. But it was a four-door. Yeah, mowed the lawn. It was a four-door Caprice Classic, two-tone. It had a 302 or a 305. I'm trying to remember what it had. It was a V8, but it wasn't a big one, and it was a two-barrel carb, so it wasn't fuel efficient, nor was it very powerful. But as you know, with first cars, it was freedom. and it didn't matter. I
So
was
well put.
in love with that car, and I think my neighbor would say, if you wax that car anymore, you're going to wax the paint right off of it. And I didn't. I tried to make it as clean as possible, and it did look later like a Caprice Undercover car of the day from the 80s.
Yep.
Because at one point I had to put new tires on it, and they didn't put the white walls on the outside. So it had black walls on it, which all the police cruisers look like that. And I think it was just kind of, tongue in cheek, but it was two-tone. It would never pass. But it was fun.
Right.
It did get me through a couple speed traps on the way to Ocean City one time.
There are many.
But,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it was like many that have the first car. I was lucky to have it. And I was probably mid 17 to 18 when I got it. I got my license, though, when I was 16 and a half, and I was driving my parents' Toyota. They had one of those Tercels, the hatchback. And it was a economy little car, but that's what I learned to drive on. And when the Caprice came in, it was a V8. It had power steering, power brakes, power locks. It had air conditioning. It had a big back seat, a big front seat. It was bench seats.
Oh, bench seats. Yep.
Yeah, bench seats.
Like driving a speedboat, right, on land. Yeah.
It was a land yacht, and I think Joe had one too. He had a big convertible land yacht.
Yes, he did.
So we could relate, and they were horrible on gas, just absolutely horrible. But gas was $1.50, $2 a gallon, I think, back then, until the first Gulf War, and Doug and I were probably shelling out over $2 a gallon, thinking, how are we going to do this? And it was little did we know where that would have gone. But that car turned into freedom. And I drove that car for several years, and I loved that car because of what it was. I remember putting a Pioneer stereo system in it and an amplifier. Yeah, the old Alpine amplifiers and subwoofers and stuff. And it was learning how to wire stuff, tinker with the car. The car always had this really bad fault when I was going to the community college, where it would stall on this one hill every time when it was cold, and it was a left-hand turn going uphill, and it would stall every time. And I had to go that way. I couldn't go a different way. And I'd be stuck in the middle of the intersection, all these people honking at me, have to get out, open the hood, and then stick a finger down to get the choke to open up and get unstuck. And then, so you're going to school smelling like gas. It was always, fun. But, the memories you have, I remember that to this day. It was freezing out and your hands cold and you smell like gas.
So what happened to that car?
So that car ended up going to my younger brother, and that became his first car. Okay. And he was 3 years younger. I drove it for several years, and when he got his license, I ended up buying the next car was an 85 Olds Tornado. I bought it from my stepfather, and it was all gold, and it had tan interior and the sheep cloth interior. It was the epitome of the 80s. It was a gold vinyl top.
Rich Corinthian leather.
It was caliente. It was a front-wheel drive V8.
Yeah, I was going to say that was a front-wheel drive V8 vehicle.
And I loved that about that car. It was really good in the snow. It was great handling. It actually was very smooth riding, but it had the biggest doors. It was a two-door, and the biggest doors of any car I've ever owned. And I remember taking that car when I went away to school at Towson State and trying to park in the parking garage, and you can't open the door to get out of the car. Yeah. Forget it. You have to find a spot like on the end that you could get the driver's door open without hitting a car. So it was limiting in that respect. But I ended up driving that car for a number of years, and it was a great car. We had a lot of fun. I back and forth from Annapolis to Towson in that car, and it was the car had a digital dash. Remember the early Oldsmobile, and it would roll up to 188 and then roll back down. Well, this car had this glitch where you'd be driving along on 695 and all of a sudden the dash would roll up to 188 and roll back down and you'd have to pound on the dash and it would come back on. And you could never trust the little gauge of gas. It had these little bars. And I remember one time I ran out of gas and I had 2 bars left. And I was walking distance of the gas station. I said, that's it. I'll never trust those bars of gas again. And the digital was not as accurate, I guess. But I had that car for a number of years. And I think that car went to my younger brother after I was done with it. And the Caprice moved on somewhere else. And when I owned that car, I ended up buying at a good friend's, his mom had an estate sale. And there were 2 Triumph Spitfires in the estate sale over in Sherwood Forest.
This is what started it all.
It started it, yeah. I said, can we go look at them? And he said, yeah, I'm doing the sale. Let's go look. And I fell in love. I said, how do I get one of these? And he said, well, they're $1,000 a piece, you know.
Oh.
And I'm like, that's a lot of cash. I was going to school and I was working. So I did it. I bought it and I didn't look back. The car was, I would call John Deere green. It was Triumph green or Kermit-green. And
not the British racing green?
Not
That's
British
distinct from British racing green. Got you.
Yeah,
got you.
It wasn't that dark, but it was bright green, so to speak.
Okay, so there were 2 Spitfires, right?
Yeah, there were 2 in the sale. One was mustard yellow, and the other one was this light green color. And
the green. Okay.
The green had a soft top. The yellow one had a hard top and overdrive. And I liked the green one. It just sang to me. So I bought that, but I didn't know it didn't have brakes.
Both 76s? I'm sorry, the year was both 76s?
No, I'm sorry. Todd, my friend Todd bought the other one, and that was in 1980. And it was one of the last years, I think, of the Spitfire, 80 or 81. And it had overdrive. It was a little switch on the stick shift.
Yeah.
And his had brakes, but it would only do like 40 miles an hour. It had some weird water choke or something. But mine didn't have brakes, but it could drive. So I had to follow him from Sherwood Forest all the way back to St. Margaret's Road in Annapolis, using his bumper as a brake and the handbrake, what's left of the handbrake.
Oh, boy.
It was like watching Beavis and Butthead try to drive 2 vintage cars. Stop ramming me, Beavis.
And of course, this was at night, right, James?
This was that. Yeah, we did not do that in the day. I think that was late in the evening or something.
Yes.
And I don't even remember if the lights worked, but I just remember the smile on our faces driving. It's like we stole the show or something, and these people are probably looking at us like, why did they buy those? It was just, I was 20 or 21 years old, 20 years old. And I remember my parents saying, how can you afford 2 cars? I was like, I just did it. I didn't think about it. I had to have that car. Mm-hmm. And I never regretted owning the car. It was one of those experiences that took me to where I am today. It set that seed. It planted that seed where that love of working on it and tinkering on it turned into a business later down the road. But it was a car that I ended up taking from Annapolis to Towson, and I ended up joining an MG club at Towson to justify the insurance on the car, because you were only supposed to use it for parades and special events.
Right.
And I was, I'm under 21 years old, and to have a convertible when you're that young is really expensive. So I got historic tags, and I think it was with Allstate at the time. And they said, well, you can only drive a certain amount of miles a year, and you have to use it for events. And I said, well, that's a big gray area. What's an event?
Right.
is a monthly meeting up at Towson at the MG Club an event? That sounds like an event. And
Agreed.
So I joined this club, and I still to this day have the patch from one of the rallies I did. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
I kept it all in
MG's of Baltimore.
Hold that up.
MG's the Baltimore Historic Rally. I pulled that down for you guys. So that was one of the first rallies I did. We ended up driving the Triumph. My girlfriend at the time at Towson went with me as a co-pilot, and we did a time speed distance rally where you drove. It was from Towson out to Mount Area, and we did all these back roads, and it wasn't about speeding. It was about keeping the proper speed. So whoever was closest to the speed won that leg. And then they had a parking lot set up where you do cone drills. And, then the Spitfire had one of the best turning radiuses of any car I've ever owned. And it did the best in that cone execution because you could literally turn the wheels sideways. It had incredible turning radius. But it just kind of, I did a couple rallies with them, and it just kind of was like, wow, this is fun. And all these like-minded people were doing this. And I just kind of fell in love with that. When I left school, when I moved to the Eastern Shore, I brought the car with me and I used it for quite some time. And then it developed I'd say a bad noise. There was a crack in the head that I was always adding water to it and I could never find it. And it perpetuated into a worse and worse problem. And one day it just died and then sat, and it was nothing sadder than seeing a car you love with grass growing up around it in the yard. So I think we've all seen those pictures, and I ended up selling it to my brother's girlfriend.
Keeping it in the family again, James.
Yeah, it was I think whatever her truck payment was at the time, $400, $300. And she took it, and knowing that the engine was shot, and had it rebuilt and used it. And I got to drive it one last time. It was really cool. And then
that is fantastic.
They brought it down, my brother and her, and they let me take it out for one last drive. And then I'm not sure where the car ended up after that. They broke up and I never saw it again. But it was one of those experiences that for years it stuck with me. But I would drive that car, and I would imagine some of your, I say older podcast listeners. I'm old. I'm 51, but I'm not. Doug and I,
you're vintage.
Going back, we're vintage. But these cars were not. That was a '76 that was 3 years older than I was when I was born. That was not a vintage car, but it was vintage enough in 91, 92, 93 when I was driving it. It's a 25-year-old car. And I would drive that car at 11:30, 12 o'clock at night from Annapolis, where I was living, up to Towson and over to, the Beltway with a vintage British car that barely had headlights, Lucas Electronics, and was prone to overheating. And I had no cell phone. This is before cell phones. And I didn't have a care in the world or a worry that I would make it. I just, caution to the wind.
In the universe.
Just trust in the universe and to people that might stop and help you. And it was one of the most freedom type of things where you just go. And then for so many people that I've talked to in this business that have grown up with these cars, older than myself, that's how they lived with them. They drive these cars cross country and not give a thought to it. And, I had somebody recently helped to find a home for a 67 Mustang that was going up to Philly. And the guy said, "Do you think I can drive it back to Philly from here?" And I said, "I don't see why not. Be prepared, make sure that you have, coolant and oil." And the car was fully restored. It was gorgeous. It was 20-year-old restoration, but it was immaculate. And he drove that car back. Not a problem, 3 hours to Philly. And, that was commonplace. That was a car that was built to be driven every day. And I think we lose sight of that sometimes. Now, it's not going to be as comfortable as the modern car, and it's not going to be as fuel efficient and the creature comforts, but that was a nice car back in the day. So I got that Spitfire under my skin, and I loved it, and I always had a soft spot for it. And then a couple of years ago, I sat in one that a customer brought by, and I just said, "This car got really small." I don't know how I fit in this car, and getting in and out of it.
They shrink over time. You
They
put them in the dryer, and
exactly. Yeah, but there's such a love for these cars, and then you look at some of the prices that Spitfires are bringing, it's like, oh my gosh, I should have kept the darn thing. But who would have thought, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where it started with those cars, and then along the way, I never lost the love for the sports cars or the European cars, and had many different jobs, and ended up. About 8 years ago, getting back into classic cars, working for somebody, and it did that for a year, and then started out with a business partner, and we did that for 3.5 years. And partnerships are tough. We worked hard. We had a really good client base, and we've went on our own way, and I started over. And my love has been for keeping these things on the road as best I can, and learning as much as I can about them.
So, yeah, that's okay. So perfect segue. That's where we wanted to navigate the conversation to. So, would you mind telling us a little bit, if you feel comfortable, sharing the business name?
Oh, yeah.
How do you? I'm fascinated by small businesses like these. Sort of, what's the cadence on a car? How long does it take? What are you comfortable doing? Is it kind of one of these from the ground to the crown things? In other words, you handle everything, or?
I've done that on a couple full restoration, or finished a full restoration on it was a 53 MGTD that later we had a customer that did a full restoration on it, and we did finish the car, and it went to a concours, and it won an award, and it was a really nice car. But it was a car that did 45 miles an hour. You don't drive those on the highway, really. They're not suited for that. Everybody's so much faster nowadays. And he ended up selling it, taking it to auction, and getting another British car. He got an MGB GT. That's a little faster with overdrive. But yeah, I've done full restoration. That does take time. It does take years. It's not a TV show. It depends on how many people you can throw at it. And the TV shows throw 25 or 30 people, but it's not realistic. I like watching some of the stuff because it makes you laugh, and old cars are like old houses, and you run into stuff, and it's usually rust, and it's usually not good. So you have to have the stomach for it if you're going to get into it, and you have to know sometimes when to say when, or what's a good candidate. And as I am, like everybody else, you're learning every day the better way to do it, and you have to be open-minded, because sometimes you don't know everything, and there are other people that, especially that have been doing this a long time, that you listen to, and you learn from their experience. And that's been the greatest teacher for me. Like I said, I have a mentor that is 81, that was a Mercedes mechanic and European specialist for 52 years, and he's retired, but he comes in every week and checks on me. And it's like a college education. You can learn more in 5 minutes listening to this gentleman than you can reading a book. I mean, it's just somebody's been there and done that. And that's what we need. We're losing that every day. We have in Easton, we have a gentleman named Dickie Moreland he rebuilds crankshafts. He's one of the few that's left that still does it. There are very few engine rebuilders in this area. There used to be several, and now we lost these people. It's become a lost art, and I'm trying to soak up as much of this information as possible. So my business, when I started over, it's called McRae Enterprises LLC. Just my last name. Enterprises, because I do a little bit of everything, but mostly it's European sports cars and classic cars, some American classic cars. I do a lot of 50s, 60s, 70s, some 80s cars. I've done a couple 90s cars, but it starts getting into computer stuff. I'm more comfortable with carburetors and early fuel injection. It's just what I've been working on, and I know. and I know my limits, and they're not so much on the newer stuff. So I just feel more comfortable with the older stuff, points and condenser and coil plugs, wires, that type of stuff. It's pretty straightforward, and I like that.
Is it hard for you to get parts for a lot of these cars? That's one question I have. Second question is what happens when you get stuck or you need to find documentation? Do you have a huge library? Do you find things online? Do you get manuals on?
Well, I can show you.
Look at that. It's like a library. Yeah.
Yeah. I've got a good collection of books for a lot of the cars I work on.
I think I saw Chilton's manuals.
Oh yeah, you'll probably see a couple, and there's Haynes.
Our younger listeners don't know about those, but pre-internet.
And I'm going to let you in on a little secret called YouTube.
Yes, sir.
There is. I know it's a joke, and YouTube mechanic certified and all that stuff, but I'm going to be honest with you. There are a lot of people that, especially if you get into a situation where you've never been into that part of the car or have to diagnose something, it is a really valuable resource because there's like-minded people that are struggling with the same thing. And these forums, there are a lot of forums that are specific to the car, and I recommend going to those. There's nothing better than a owner's group that has 25, 30, 50 years of experience on a car, that has been there and done that can lead you down the path to fix a problem. I've had so many times where I've talked to people and, you find that you pull a thread here and it takes you to another thread on a forum, and then you find your answer, or at least a way to solve a problem. So the internet's a huge part of it, but also I have had a lot of success with vendors and private companies that sell parts where they have experience and expertise in certain car makes, and they have the answers. You can you're going to find in most cases that the people that are selling the parts or selling the cars, they're passionate too, and they want to see them stay on the road, so they're going to help you. I've had so many cases. I've had I've had vendors that have sent me thousands of dollars in parts without me paying for it. I mean, trust.
Wow. Yes.
That's very unusual in this day and age, where they say, I'm going to send you an invoice, you mail me a check, and I've had that happen a couple times. And that is remarkable that happens still. And it is a testament to some people. It's kind of, it's amazing, because most people will be like, give me your credit card number and I'll send it out once it's paid for. Right. But I've had several instances that's happened. And then I've those same people have helped me diagnose an issue or a particular issue on like a 1940 Buick that I was having, and just remarkable. And they've been doing that for 50 years. That's all they do. And if you, I'll just say, if you're into a certain car and you're having trouble, find an owners group, join a club on Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook's Facebook's a good gateway.
Yes, absolutely. And my motto has been for years: you don't know unless you go. You don't know unless you ask. Yeah, you may not like the answer, but if you don't ask, you will never know the answer. And sometimes asking the question will end up getting you another project car. Ask me how I know. So, that's bitter experience, but, that's just what happens, and we keep them going. So, but yeah, the business, I work on mainly these 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, some 40s I work on. The Packards, my own project, and that's taking up most of my shop, but that's a passion project that I've always wanted to build, and it's slowly coming along. I did last year for my 50th, I bought a 911 from a customer that I just couldn't refuse the deal. And he wanted a newer one, and his wife wouldn't let him have two. So
Well, why'd you have to have it? Why'd you have to have it? Was it him? Was it the car? Was it something about it?
It was the car. I've always wanted a 911. I wanted an air-cooled 911, but the prices are so astronomical. Even a junker is just a fortune. And I've worked on a lot of them, and I have a client that's got a bunch. And if I ever want to drive
right behind you.
Yeah, there's one behind me, but the green one's
up on the lift.
Love the color. I can see just a little bit of color peeking out beneath the.
It's like an anaconda green, I think, or conda green they call it.
Okay.
That was almost the color of my Triumph Spitfire, believe it or not.
Wow.
It was about that green. It was repainted, and I don't think it was the original green. But the 911 he had for 10 years, it's a 99 996 six-speed cab. And I knew the car, I knew him, and I knew the people that worked on it, and all the usual suspects of things on 996s that everybody complains about had already been taken care of. And, it was an opportunity that I was looking at a BMW at the time that another client had. It was a 323i 5-speed convertible, low mileage. And we were talking price, and I was getting anxious. And then this 911 popped up that was way more than the BMW. And I remember taking a picture of each to my wife and saying, if you had an opportunity to buy, if I could buy one of these cars, which car would you drive? And she said, I drive the 911. And I said, okay, that answered it. It's done. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And I bought that car a year and a half ago. I've driven it maybe 6 or 7 times. I've worked so much, it's in the garage at home. Every time I take it out, it's like therapy. It's, 296 horsepower in a 911 is nothing nowadays. But it's not just the horsepower. It's, now they're 400 and 500, 600 horsepower.
Yes, they
have
are.
A flat 6. And you can't compete with that, but it's the handling. It's the way the car responds. And Doug, you've had a 996. You know how they feel. It's the closest I could get to an air cooled by 1 year, affordability wise. But there's nothing like. I always said to myself that if I could afford one sports car, it'd be a 911. I grew up. My best friend in school, Todd, had a 74 911S Targa that I rode around in, and I just loved that car. The way the car handled, the way it sounded, the way it could take a curve and pull out of it. It was just something about 911. And so it always stuck with me. And I said, one day I want to own one. And it fell in my lap, and I don't regret it at all. So I look forward to the times I take it out. And I actually have a new exhaust up on the shelf for it, waiting to go on.
Well,
or as they say, heat exchangers, right?
Yeah.
On the old one.
Yeah, the Pfister exhaust. Have you ever heard of those?
I think so.
Pfister out of California. It does a lot of 911 exhausts, and it's kind of like a automatic bypass, or it's a built-in bypass. So I'm looking forward to putting that on and doing some maintenance to the car. But shop is full.
Yeah, we have to have and that might be the perfect place to kind of draw us to a close here, because we have to have James back, because as I'm telling you, this guy's a barn find. Found him in a barn. But if he pivoted this for our listenership who can't see, he pivoted his phone, and he has a library, just books and books. Yes, he's pivoting it again.
I'm pivoting because the Triumph I showed you earlier, the 60 TR3A.
Yeah, he's showing it to us.
Literally, that is a barn find. That car was found in a barn in Oxford when Doug went down there to see it. It sat in that, the family owned it 25 years. And for at least the last 10 or 15 years, it sat in the barn at a boatyard in Oxford. And I helped them pull it out of there. And I mean, the steering was stuck. The wheels are stuck. It literally was a barn find. And it was just one of those things where it's exciting. You get goosebumps at the same time. And it's like, oh, the potential. And then you realize, oh, the rust.
The reality sinks in
so much.
Yes.
But I got to
Rust
tell
comes
you,
for everybody. Yeah, as they say, Father Time is undefeated. And
that car is now the engine's rebuilt, the transmission's rebuilt, waiting to go back in the car. It's waiting on me, so I got to get going on it. So
amen.
Well, thank you for having me.
Hey, we're not going to hold you much longer, but love to have you back. I am just
honored.
so we'd love to have you. I just like, and you're maybe the second or third person that we've interviewed who it just feels so authentic when we have you on and you're broadcasting from your barn, from your garage, so that we can see all of this. It's just, with the fluorescent shop lights across the top, over his right shoulder. He's got the 911 up on a lift underneath the car cover. Very mysterious, but uber cool, man. And the Volvo is over the left shoulder,
over there,
which I'm a Volvo
guy.
So
are you?
Yeah. I'm just drooling all over my notebook here.
Christian, I got a couple good Volvo stories. One of my clients has a 62 210 Duett.
Oh, boy.
He brought it home from Sweden, brought it over here from Sweden when he worked there. And that car, I did a lot of work to that car. First car I've ever worked on has 2 heater cores, one on each side. And it's not supposed to have that. It only has one, but it lived above the Arctic Circle its whole life.
Yeah.
And we found out that it was orange in the engine compartment and that the car was owned by the Swedish telephone company. And they painted all their vehicles orange. And someone owned the car after that. They bought the car, they painted it blue, and it was owned by a textile business and it lived above the Arctic Circle. So someone added another heater core to have heat in the car. And it has this, you ever seen the radiator shades on the old Volvos?
No.
I had to make one from scratch. I had to go to Lowe's and buy a leveler blind. It was crazy. Oh,
we're gonna have you back. We gotta have you back. We'll get into we'll get deep into some of these stories, and I'm just it's been real wonderful geeking out with you. What do you think, Doug? What do you think about our barn find today, James? Our barn find.
This was the barn find in the season.
It was a blast, and I love when we reconnect with old friends. So again, if you want to reach out to James, get a hold of James. We will have his information on our website, carslove.com. We will also have
it'll be in the show notes as well.
Exactly. So if you're listening to the show, you will be 2 or 3 clicks away from everything you need to know about James, his business, how to get a hold of him, and
can I just say I no longer take Dogecoin or the Doge and the other one. I don't take that as payment anymore.
But Ethereum he's good with. He's got no problem with Ethereum.
Yeah, I think
he's a cash guy.
Yeah. Awesome.
Elon pumped and dumped. No.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, all right, James. It was great meeting you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
James, great.
Likewise.
Thank you, Doug.
I can't wait to make it out to your garage.
Yeah,
soon,
come down and see you.
Yep.
And I'll show you in the other right down the line here in the building. I've got another bay full of vintage sports cars that I can show you.
Can't wait.
Maybe for the next time.
Absolutely. This might be our entree into a YouTube show with video, because I wish everybody could see what we're seeing. It really is remarkable.
Got some cool stuff.
Congratulations on all you've built, James. I mean that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Christian. Yeah. And Doug, thank you very much for having me. This has been a lot of fun. And
thank you much.
It's really cool to reconnect with someone from high school, especially though that we're car guys. And, I had no idea. And I'm so glad you reached out. This is really cool.
Ditto. Well, we have Joe to thank. And
thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Joe's another barn find. Joe is another barn find broadcasting
Joe,
from his
let's
barn.
just say Joe is one of a kind barn find.
Barn find, boat find.
He has more cylinders than anyone I know.
I love it. It. Sounds like
and boats too.
He's a car guy. Yeah, boats and cars for sure.
Love it.
Yep.
All right, gentlemen.
Wonderful.
Well, this has been great.
Guys.
Thank you again. All right, Doug. And we will see you later, Cars Love Nation. To all the cars I've loved before, reach out. Christian at carslove.com, Doug at carslove.com. We'll see you soon. Next time. Take care. Goodbye.
Thank you, guys.